And hit it.
Employees are off the job at Ford's Cleveland engine plant. Just the latest layoffs in the ongoing strike against Ford, GM, and Stellantis. I talked to one of those former employees and the union about the impact and the latest on negotiations.
Another week of the auto workers' strike. And another plant in Northeast Ohio operating without hundreds of employees.
Anxiety is high, all right? Tensions are a little bit high.
After 23 years with the union, Teresa Webb is out of a job, and her two sons are also among the 375 employees that Ford laid off.
We've been preparing. We've been knowing that this could potentially come, whether or not it came to our plant or not.
UAW Local 1250 says the reason is the engine plant in Brook Park feeds motors to plants in Detroit and Chicago. The workers there are on the picket lines.
It's very tough. The unknown for our membership is probably the biggest anxiety and the frustration.
Pat Wallace says Ford blatantly violated their seniority agreements. Instead of laying off those with the least experience first, they laid off the entire department.
Yeah.
Well, it's unfortunate, right? I mean, we're standing up for what's right for the working class people of America.
In the meantime, they have a growing food pantry.
See all the new bags that just came in over the weekend.
Food and hygiene products in case they're called on to strike, and items to serve the hundreds who now only have $500 a week of strike pay to rely on.
Oh, this is $500 a week only. And it was your brothers in Detroit striking and Chicago striking that laid you off because they can't use the motors anymore, the engines. Not motors. Motors electrical. So they're making these engines, and the Detroit plants can't put the engines in cars that aren't being made. And that's why you are now laid off. It wasn't Ford, and that's why they laid all of you off. They don't need any of you. That's economic lesson number 1. Holy crap. I'm about to teach economics, people. Listen up. It's really simple, and I'll use very simple examples. All right, pot that down. Okay. All right. Did you hear that? Did you hear the news thing on that introduction? That is a way that the media frames this. That it's that the Ford laid them off. No, their brothers in the union laid them off because they went on strike and they don't need the engines. They're not putting in the cars, and that's how this works. So this is about the minimum wage, SQ3 or 832 here in Oklahoma. This is about the minimum wage, unionism, and stupidity in general. So let me tell you a story. Let me tell you a story about Detroit. About Detroit, and again, the minimum wage, bad economic policies, stupidity. And I'm also going to tell you a story about a 16-year-old girl that I know very well, who got a job last summer for $14.50 an hour here in Oklahoma with a restaurant, nationwide restaurant. Well, I don't know if it's nationwide, but it's pretty widespread. And she got a job for $14.50 an hour plus split tips, because they split the tips. And this is even though, and she's a high school student, this is a part-time job, and she's making pretty good money for living at home. And this is even though the minimum wage here in our great state of Oklahoma is $7.50 an hour. How in the world did she do that? How did she do that? How is this possible? Well, everybody on minimum wage is everybody is making $7.50 an hour. These people, these terrible companies are paying them nothing. How did she do that? The minimum wage is a law of $17.50, and if you pay people $7.50 you are going to get people that are worth $7.50. If you pay people more, you'll get better, more productive people, and they'll be happier, and you'll be happier as an employer, as an employee. But what is let's continue with this story. I'm going to tell you a story about Detroit. Okay? And this is what no one will tell you. So let's get to that story about Detroit. Do you remember when Detroit was the automotive capital of the world, the car capital? It was called Motor Cities. It made majority of the automobiles that we drove. That was only 30 years ago. Think about that. 30 years, it's a blink of an eye. 30, 35 years ago, Detroit was booming in the 1990s. McDonald's was paying $10 an hour in the 1990s. How is that possible? Well, let's go back to a little bit of history of Detroit. We'll tell that. In the 1940s, Detroit was the arsenal of democracy. It built the tanks and the aircraft. It built thousands and thousands of aircraft and thousands of tanks and jeeps and everything that they wanted. GM actually manufactured guns and cannons and everything else. We turned our manufacturing base into the biggest arsenal of democracy ever. And we sent those planes and those tanks and those jeeps over to both coasts, and we kicked everybody's butt. The city was run so well that in the 1950s, other cities sent people to Detroit to see how we did it. They were like, how did you make such a great city? Detroit in the city was Hudson's, and Hudson's was a store. And Hudson's made the first mall in America. It was called Northfield Mall. And it was run so well that we didn't have traffic. Not traffic jams like this. And it was run so well, the traffic was done so spectacularly that that people came over and said, "How'd you do this?" They had below level expressways, and then the secondary roads went on top of the expressways. You didn't have any stopping and running into each other. It was wonderful. And you didn't turn left, you turned right, and then you went around. It was called a Michigan turn, the Michigan loop. And it was wonderful. People from all over. And in 1960, Detroit elected a Democrat mayor. And they said, we can make this city better. And they started implementing Democrat policies in 1960. We can make this city better. And people fell for it. They went, oh, okay, this is great. And so they started implementing their programs. And then in 1968 or 67, they elected Mayor Mushmouth, Coleman Young. Maybe it was 64. I can't remember. Look it up. Doesn't matter. Coleman Young was a corrupt piece of garbage. A Democrat, a rat, a Castro accolade. He was a Castro wannabe. And he implemented more Democrat programs. And the Democrats got a hold of the UAW. I mean, the UAW was probably run by the mafia, and they ran it really well, probably. But now the Democrats had to take over, like the Democrats had to take over Las Vegas. Look how that's doing. So it took 10 years, and then that's when it started going downhill. Because you got to remember, Detroit was a really well-run city. The car companies were huge. They were great employers. We made some of the best cars in the world. And in 1970, there were 1.5 million UAW members. And they went in there, almost any manufacturing plant. Aircraft manufacturing, tanks, military goods, manufacturing for parts that went into the cars. You had to be a UAW member, and they controlled like 5 states. The UAW was huge. You didn't piss off the UAW. They'd go on strike, and you, as a scumbag politician, would be out of a job. So they were huge. The UAW was a giant labor organization, and they started listening to people like the Economic Policy Institute, who we will get to shortly, and they started using the minimum wage laws as a cat's paw to beat the car companies over the head. So they would point to the minimum wage, and they would say, raise the minimum wage. And then the Democrats would go in, and they would raise the minimum wage, 50 cents or whatever. So if they raised the minimum wage for 50 cents, then the UAW wanted a $5 an hour raise. So they went from $20 an hour. The UAW in the 80s were making 70s. They were making $20 an hour, $25 an hour. That was huge. That was a lot of money. And they started having to lay people off. Right? They didn't hire as many out of college or out of high school to work on the lines. And things started getting pretty friction. You know, a lot of friction started in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s. So what happened? How did they use this? Well, what happened was, that, like I said, the people like the Economic Policy Institute came in and they taught the people at the UAW how to use the minimum wage to beat the the manufacturers over the head to keep raising the wages of the union worker. The union worker were skilled workers. They could turn a bolt on a bumper. First of all, you were taught that by other union thugs, and you were taught to do this, right? And you went and you got your bumper, and you went like this, and you turned your bumper nut on, and you sent it down the line, and everybody went, "Ooh, well, he's a seasoned professional," and they paid you really good money, but it wasn't enough. So they just kept banging on the minimum wage. Again, minimum wage here in Oklahoma is $7.50. 16-year-old daughter, that was 15 at the time, I think. Got it? No, she was 16. That's right. Just turned 16, goes out, gets a job for $14.50 an hour, plus tips. Tip sharing. But you keep banging on the minimum wage, guess what goes up? The wages for professionals and wages for unions. So they started beating the manufacturers up, and pretty soon the manufacturers were paying almost $60 an hour to the UAW worker, plus benefits. Benefits like health benefits that you didn't pay for. The car companies paid for them. So you had all this money going in, and it was huge. So what happened? Why did Detroit become a shithole? Oh, I don't know. Hold on. So as wages went up and the power of the union, the UAW grew, and the power of the manufacturer and the manufacturers weakened. And then the Democrats came in and they shamed the car companies with big fat cat this and fat cat that. In 1984, okay, the UAW workers and for some reason the car companies, they came up with, they agreed at one of their strikes that they weren't going to lay people off. They were going to create something called the Jobs Bank. And it was established in 84, and the program guaranteed union workers nearly full wages, almost 95% of their wages. Even when their jobs were eliminated due to plant restructuring or new technology, it didn't matter. You were going to go into one of these job banks. And what were the job banks? Well, listen to this. What the workers did in the bank, and these guys are called bankers. The ones who were laid off, they're called bankers. So they went to a company-designated location. You had to show up there in the morning. It was like a box, you know. It was like, you know, box outside of the plant that you worked in. And you went into your box, and then you sat there. So you'd report to the plant, and then you'd wait out your 8-hour shift. Now, you could do community service. You were sent to local schools and thrift stores and nonprofits, and you would volunteer to give out food or something. Who knows? You could do that. You could go to your favorite Democrat community service and do that. Education and training. You workers could take classes. And you'd think classes in making cars better. You think, hey, these are your classes. You know, you could make your cars better. And here's something that you could do with the Six Sigma engineering. Here, come here and take a look at this. No. The classes, you could do anything from home wiring, learn how to wire your home, which doesn't take that much, to personal interests like poker or silk flower arranging. You could take silk flower arranging, and then you could sell silk flowers on the side while you got 95% of your pay sitting there learning silk flower arranging. Leisure, you had some leisure time. In the plants without structured programs, workers famously spent their shifts reading newspapers, watching movies, playing cards. There was one where they gave these guys riding lawnmowers, and they would go out and cut the lawns around the factories, but they got into these riding lawnmower races, of course, because they're guys, and they would get drunk. They would go out to their cars and drink a bunch of beer. Then they'd get on their riding lawnmowers, and they would ride around, and they had to come to an end because they got caught. Some news guy caught them. But this is what was going on in the 80s into the 90s. And you think, well, someone had to look at this program and say, this is terrible. This is ridiculous. You got to stop this. No. Why the program ended. The job bank was widely criticized as a symbol of industrial excess. No, it's a symbol of union excess. It's a symbol of this nonsense Democrat power excess. That's what it is. And it became a major political target during the automotive industry crisis. What year do you think that is? It was the 90s, 94, 99. No, because in the 1990s, I was actually working for a guy, a restaurateur, and you know what? We couldn't get people to come into the restaurant unless we were paying them $10 an hour in 1990s. $10 an hour plus tips for wait staff. That was unheard of because Detroit was doing so well. So, you'd think, though, right? You would think that they were doing so well that they would get rid of these stupid programs. No, they didn't. So, by 2006, General Motors alone was spending roughly $400 million annually. And you would say, well, this is right-wing nonsense. This is from NPR. The right-wingers at NPR. They were spending $400 million annually to maintain a bank where a bunch of drunk auto workers got on lawnmowers and went racing. This is what happened. Okay, so the bailout condition of 2009, after The Big Short after the banks screwed up our entire economy by listening to people like Summers and Paulson, and the complete stupidity of giving people that don't have jobs houses for years. That's a whole nother story. Finally, the banks, the economy goes in the toilet, and the bailout condition of 2009, the federal government made the elimination of the jobs bank. GM and Chrysler received billions in emergency rescue loans. That was one of the conditions, get rid of the jobs banks. So the current status is why the original job bank program was suspended in 2009. Modern contracts right now still includes the subs, the supplemental unemployment benefits, which combined with state unemployment, you get 85% of your pay if you go on strike or if you get laid off for years. So this is how they use these programs, these minimum wage. You have to have the minimum wage. They start beating the minimum wage drum, and then they get these. These were $60 an hour jobs. So you had $60 an hour. 90% of $60 an hour. What is that? That's like $54 an hour. And you're there getting drunk and racing lawnmowers that they give you. You don't have to use your own lawnmower. It's become a cat's paw for politicians and these think tanks. This is what's going on right now. This isn't, it's still to this day. It's coming here to Oklahoma. And I'll tell you, here it is right here. The Oklahoma Policy Organization, which is the Oklahoma Policy Institute, much like the Economic Policy Institute, they're hooked at the frickin' hip. They both spout the same thing. The Economic Policy Institute writes a paper. They send it to the Oklahoma Policy Institute, which publishes it. They say, "Hey, we got it from these guys who are in Washington D.C. and they're non political. They're not a bunch of Democrats." Well, listen to this. All right, the Economic Policy Institute is usually described as presenting a left-wing, pro-union viewpoint on public policy. It is being run since 2021 by Heidi Shierholz, a former chief economist at the Department of Labor, which is a Democrat. These people aren't these free spirits. They're not somebody that says, "Hey, let's take a look at this policy." They write the paper pro-policy. This SQ 832 is just like Detroit, and we're going to end up. Hey, listen to me. I'm telling you something right now. I look at when I moved here in Oklahoma. Guess Sand Springs was empty. The manufacturing base of Sand Springs is down in Mexico, except maybe one or two plants. Out in Broken Arrow, that glass factory, that was Ford. That's gone. That's gone to China or gone to Mexico. Where do you think these jobs went? Where do you think people in Detroit were so pissed? Why do you think, NAFTA was looked down on? And that's what we're going to get into our next show. Our next program, okay, this is the history. This is where this comes from. This is what this has done. This is what the policy institutes like the Economic Policy Institute and the Oklahoma Policy Institute, these institutes write these stupid papers which the politicians, the Democrat politicians, pick up. And they blast them all over the media. The media is very friendly. They say, "Oh, it's the Economic Policy Institute." And this stuff, Detroit happens. Detroit was a wonderful, huge economic powerhouse that other cities loved to come over and look at. Now it is a garbage dump. It's a shithole. Like every Democrat-run city, when they all come with their programs, to help the city. Mondami is now saying he doesn't have the money to give everybody free stuff, and so everybody's going to have to give him money. It always happens. Look at L.A. Look at Karen Bass, what she did to L.A. Look at all these crap hole cities. They are all run by Democrats. And Democrats are going to come into Oklahoma, and just as we're starting to get out of all these manufacturing plants moving, Sand Springs emptying out, Broken Arrow, go around to the manufacturing areas. They were empty. They're starting to fill back up. They're starting to come back, and they don't want that. And they're going to do this. And if my 16-year-old daughter can get a job for $14.50 an hour, we don't even need a minimum wage law. Let's have the minimum wage law of Sweden, where they all like to point to. Oh, it's Sweden. Go and look at the minimum wage law of Sweden. There isn't one. There isn't one in Switzerland. I don't think any European nation has a minimum wage law. It's a stupid law. And it's used by evil people to beat our industry to death, and that's what they've done. All right, it's 26 minutes, and I'm going to back out of this right now. I'm going to come back. This is part one. I don't know how many parts this is going to be because this is a really complicated issue. But I'm going to focus on Oklahoma and Oklahoma City and Tulsa and Broken Arrow and all these. Bartlesville. It used to be a huge oil city. Phillips Petroleum. He chased them out. This state has to remain red, and we have to fight back, and that's what I'm going to start doing. I'm focusing on Oklahoma from now on. And we're going to start with this 832 state question 832. This is coming up in June. So let's get this together, share, and send this video, these videos I'm going to be making, send them to your friends, because this is the only way we are going to fight this stuff. They're not going to tell you this stuff. There's other things to fight. There's, our poor, they're starting to bring in more and more illegal aliens because they're not shipping them out. I don't know where the hell our DHS guy is, but he's nowhere to be seen. And so things are happening here that have been happening in other states, and it's getting worse. It's not getting better. The homeless industrial complex, they're coming. They're already here. And we're going to go into them. I'm going to be concentrating, and as hard as it is, because of all the garbage that's going on throughout I got to concentrate on Oklahoma. So let's come together and concentrate on this nonsense. This is a foundational video. The reason why it is because I had to give some background of what they do and give you a city that everybody thinks is a shithole, and the reason why it's a shithole. And that's because of Democrats and Democrat policies, like these policies that don't help anybody. So let's go. I'm in 28 minutes now. Every time I want to get out, it gets me so pissed off because they're such garbage people. They turn any city, state, country into a shithole so they can rule over it. Hey, man. Remember what I'm telling you here. All right, people. We will see you very soon.